2 games to go. Last game at home. We want to try and win the match, of course, but face an opponent that is also fighting. But for us, we want to try and finish with 2 wins, obviously.
We cannot accept that after all that we've been doing, now our attention is not what is really important. And what is really important is the game of West Ham. We have to all the club be focused on a big task ahead of us, because we are fighting for something huge.
Next up, we play host to Nottingham Forest in what will be our final home game of this season. Kick-off on Sunday is at 2:15 p.m, with Sky being the broadcaster of choice if you're in the UK. There are engineering works on Greater Anglia, but the lines will remain open, longer journey times being the order of the day. Bits of the DLR will also be shut. Check before you go, as ever. So, Forest then. Well, they're having one of those seasons that many teams get once in a while. Every rub of the green went their way for a while as they punched well above their weight to get themselves into the European places. They currently sit in 7th place, and that's the lowest they can finish, having 62 points, which leaves them 7 points clear of Brentford with 6 left to play for at the start of this weekend's programme. Of course, at one stage all the talk was of so-called Champions League. However, recent form has been a bit indifferent, and 1 win, 2 draws and 3 defeats in their last 6 has left them at the bottom of the Europe-chasing pack. They currently sit in the spot reserved for the Thursday night Conference League playoff slot. Above them, Villa and Chelsea are vying for the last of the so-called Champions League slots, the loser probably ending up in the Thursday night league. Please pay attention, there will be questions later. It's all a bit tight up there, and whilst the so-called Champions League isn't beyond Forest, I personally think that the Thursday night conference football is what they'll end up with. The situation is of course very fluid, and games are taking place even as I compose this, which may throw all that out the window, particularly since the FA Cup will also have a bearing on things. Now, we shouldn't move on without mentioning Taiwo Awoniyi, who ruptured an intestine after colliding with a goalpost during last week's 2-2 draw with Leicester. The injury followed yet another one of those blatantly offside decisions which was allowed to play on before the flag was waved about half an hour after the incident had occurred. Now, whether you actually go to matches or watch them on the box or simply talk about matches with your mates on a Monday, I can guarantee that you've probably seen dozens of such decisions this season and have commented or heard someone comment along the lines of, "What if a player had been injured just then?" Well, now we know. As far as I can tell, PGMOL have issued no statement on the matter. Just as well, really, it would only have muttered something about refereeing in line with the guidance issued to them anyway. However, the authorities can hardly say that it hadn't occurred to them. Literally everyone in football has mentioned this at some stage. Meanwhile, our good wishes go to Awoniyi, who is now out of the induced coma that was part of his recovery from emergency surgery. Awoniyi joins Hudson-Odoi and Murillo on the injury list for this one, which means problems at either end and in the middle for the visitors. Daisy tells me that whilst they did sign 2 new players during the window, neither will feature this weekend. Kiwi Tyler Bindon was immediately loaned back to Reading once he came, whilst Elon Musk predecessor Wayne Hennessy, who arrived as a free agent, is a goalkeeper, and they don't need another one of those for this match. Enough of them and Europe, let's move on to the wild and wacky world of association football. And there was uproar amongst broadcasters as they found themselves in the awkward position of having to actually criticise followers of their beloved Liverpool, as Terence Trent D'Arby was booed by the home support as he came on as a sub against Arsenal last weekend. There was the usual pontificating from Carragher, who admonished the world by suggesting that no pundit had the right to comment unless they were actually a Liverpool supporter. That's the Carragher who was a lifelong Everton supporter right up until he was, quote, persuaded, unquote, to join the Liverpool Academy, whereupon he became a lifelong Liverpool supporter. That's also the character who, despite possessing 0 talent for the role, is paid handsomely to comment on the vicissitudes of 19 other clubs in the Premier League. Carragher was shocked at the booing, along with every other pundit, it seems. Which is odd. After all, any bunch of individuals who jeered and celebrated the death of our 96-year-old late sovereign is hardly going to be expected to give respect to a player who simply wants to better himself. Elsewhere, anyone deluded enough to think the game is in safe hands will have surely had that view well and truly taken out and given the good kicking it deserves, if they'd actually been paying attention to events that took place in Paraguay earlier this week. FIFA top flunky Infantino turned up at the World Football Congress a few hours late, dropping the excuse that he'd been schmoozing with Donald Trump and members of Middle Eastern royal families. If that name-dropping was meant to impress, the ploy failed spectacularly, with the UEFA delegates walking out en masse in protest at what they described as personal politicking. And then there's Tottenham, the gift that keeps on giving. Now, regular readers will remember their media department spewing out all sorts of meaningless statistics in the past. These were usually related to Harry Kane scoring most goals in Europe in an odd-number calendar year. Or was it an even-numbered one? You get the picture anyway. Anyway, they seem to have missed out on a stat this year, and I'm indebted to all those who pointed out that in this calendar year, Paris Saint-Germain have beaten more Premier League teams than Tottenham have. Thank me for that one later. And so to us. Well, I told you we'd win, didn't I? What I hadn't anticipated was just how easy it would be, something which, in retrospect, now seems rather obvious. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect. There was still the late-stage tendency to retreat back to our shells and invite the opposition to attack, something which, against better sides, has proved costly over the course of this season. Even against a team that poor this weekend, we still required a splendid save from Areola to keep the clean sheet. However, overall, there was much over which to be pleased. The photo of the soon-to-depart Soufal sitting down on the pitch in a deserted stadium was one that brought a bit of a lump to the throat around these parts, I can tell you. And one does hope that there will be scope for both he and Cresswell to get some game time this weekend, in what is, of course, the last home game of the season. One bitterly recalls the sight of Steve Potts standing forlornly on the touchline as the referee blew for full time, thus denying what would have been his 400th league appearance in the last game of the 2001-2002 season. Apropos nothing, I note that Leicester have designated their last home game this season as being the last of Jamie Vardy, who is currently on 499 appearances. Since the player is currently also on 199 goals, that resolve may be tested should he still be one goal shy of his double ton with one away game left. For this weekend, it would appear that we have a full squad from which to choose, with the obvious exceptions of Antonio and Somerville, for whom next season will obviously be the target. Which brings us on to the protection. Well, I've long been saying to anyone that would listen that Forest have been punching above their weight for most of this season. There was an interesting snippet in, I think, the Sunday Times the other week, which pointed out that statistically, this season has been a bit of an outlier, particularly for Chris Wood, their top scorer, whose recent quiet spell may be more representative of his career as a whole than the purple patch that he was going through earlier on this season. As for us, should the players require an added incentive, they should take a sneaky look at the league table. Friday night's defeats for Tottenham and Man United mean that a win will confirm that we cannot finish below either of them this season. I, for one, will be looking forward to the attempts of the Tottenham media team to come up with a feel-good stat for that one. Over the last few seasons, this fixture has always gone to the home side, and I'm not going to buck that trend. So the £2.50 that I was going to buy a better framed contact book for Infantino will instead be spent on a wager on a home win. Let's go for a repeat of last season's 3-2, shall we, Ray? Enjoy the game.